Thanks, Dan. My name's Holland. I'm an alcoholic. I have a sobriety date. It's February 2nd, 2022. I have a sponsor. I sponsor other people within the program. I just spoke here like 2 months ago, and I think the last time I was here, I explained I didn't have a home group. I have a really exciting update. I still do not have a home group, but the fun thing is I go to two meetings regularly. I'm just like really not into the idea of committing to either one of them. One's like a men's meeting that I'm just not in the mood to do business with men and Alcoholics Anonymous all the time. It takes a lot of like willpower on my end to want to do that. The other one, like, is just like it's mostly if I'm in town. And I can explain that more as to why I don't have like a regular committed meeting later on. So I want to thank Jess from WACYPAA. She's the outreach chair. She's one of my good friends for asking me to speak tonight. She literally texted me like 30 minutes before I was going to speak at another meeting in person, which is like, ever say no to the gifts of AA. But real talk, like sometimes I get tired of hearing my own voice. I do hair for a living. So like I talk all day. So like the last thing I really want to do is like talk. But I'll say any opportunity to say yes to Alcoholics Anonymous because I'm super grateful for the life that I live today. So a little bit of backstory is I live in Minnesota, St. Paul, Minnesota. Very exciting, very fun. It's like half of the Twin Cities. I would like to say it's the better half. It's the favorite child. And I grew up in a small town in Alaska. And what that means is I was very bored a lot, and I got introduced to drugs and alcohol at a very young age. And I was just speaking at like once a month, I go to like high schools in Minnesota, like when they enter this health portion of their class to talk about like the effects of drugs and alcohol and like what AA is. And like one of the questions was like, why did you do like drugs and alcohol? And I was like, because I was there. Initially that's like how I started doing like anything. And like when we talk about like that feeling that we had, like I hear a lot of speakers talk about like I always felt like I didn't fit in and I just couldn't be myself and I couldn't do X, Y, and Z. That is not my story. I am very unhinged naturally. And I like to be unhinged and I don't really like to be caged. And what I liked about doing drugs and alcohol was it gave me an excuse to be unhinged because then no one was like, yo, that Holland kid's crazy. They're like, yo, that Holland kid is always drunk. And that's why he's crazy. But in like all actuality is like, I'm just crazy. So a lot of my youth was looking like just doing whatever was offered to me. And I like alcohol in its many forms, except the kind where it like makes you like really like boring and down. That wasn't really my vibe. I like alcohol in the forms where like I see fun things. I like alcohol in the forms where like it makes me throw up. And I like alcohol in the form where it keeps me up all night. So I love doing all of those things together. So a lot of my time was just doing like unhinged wild things until I eventually like got to a point where I was arrested when I was 17 and I like went to prison and yada yada yada. And that's how I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was just speaking on a panel in Texas and I was talking about like how like I understood the concept of like once I start, I can't stop, and once I'm stopped, I can't stay stopped from the first time I got sober because the when I was institutionalized for the first time, that was the first time I realized that like a lot of people in prison were talking about like when I get out of here, I want to like get a wife and I want to get a van and I want to get a house, which all seems like creepy things to all want at once. So they all wanted all they had ambition. I just wanted to get out so I can continue getting so I can continue getting fucked up. I don't know what all these people were talking about when they were like, I want like all these dreams and shit. I was like, I just want to get drunk. Like you guys are wild. So that's how I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I got sober the first time when I was 17 back in 2010. And the first time I got sober was magical. I did the things And I would like to say I had a grasp and an idea of what alcoholism looked like, but I didn't quite understand what it looked like in me. So it was really easy to do the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and be open to a new way of life because I just didn't know any other way of life. So when they introduced me a new way of life, I was like, yeah, I'm in. And then what ended up happening was I was like 4.5 years sober. Something traumatic happened to me. What happened though wasn't something that like caused me to drink initially. What it initially did is it made me start doubting my conception of God. Because if I was doing all these things well, why would my concept of God let me down? If I was doing everything that I was supposed to be doing, then why would God do this to me? And then what that looked like when I was about 5.5 years sober, 5 years sober, I went back out and I truly discovered what alcoholism looked like in my life. Initially through like what I drank like again, because when I drank that next time, I was a different alcoholic than I was the first time. And I'm like a true believer of like my disease progresses even when I'm without a drink. Because the effects produced by alcohol for me were much more enjoyable in a way that it was like it created an effect I enjoyed and I chased heavier than I did before. Because the first time before I got sober, like I just did drugs because it was just like what I wanted to do. I drank because it was what I wanted to do. This time I had a reason. It created like an escape. And I loved that feeling of escape. And that was when I like really described my alcoholism took off. And what I can describe is like the next 6 years of being an Alcoholics Anonymous as just years where I was like a bad person in AA because I was someone who was just without a drink. I am a firm believer of like I can do all the step work as much as I want, but if I'm not doing it with like a spiritual aspect, then all I'm doing is just like checklists and I'm not actually like improving my way of life because the whole reason why we do step work is to build a relationship with a God, is to have a spiritual experience. So if I'm doing step work without wanting or like even closing the door to having a spiritual experience and like am I really doing the step work of Alcoholics Anonymous or am I just doing check boxes for this like weird cult that I was inducted into? And that was pretty much what my life looked like until I got miserable again. And I was like really, really sick inside the rooms of AA. And I was just like a shell of a person going to Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was the worst time I'd ever had in my entire life because I was without any type of solution. I didn't believe in the spiritual solution anymore because, like, my God let me down. So why would I believe in that? I knew drinking would create like a temporary effect, and I'm not a temporary effect person. I just didn't enjoy, like, I knew that it would create like a temporary release, but it wasn't going to be long enough. So I was like at the gates where it was like, I need to make a decision. And the last time I drank was during COVID of 2022. I got in COVID. I went to Walgreens to buy some Theraflu. The nice Walgreens employee who looked like he should have worked at Hot Topic was like, you can buy a bottle of Burnett's for cheaper. And I was like, bet. And the next thing I knew, I was drunk again and I was miserable. So at the time, I was living with this guy who was much older than me that I was not interested in any shape or form. But like I knew he was like really interested in me because like duh. So I like really loved the like roof he provided, and I really loved the physical things he provided, and like not himself physically, but like I like the house and I like that he watched my dog while I was at work. Um, but I was ready to kind of escape this like situation that I created. So I heard of a treatment center in Wayzata, Minnesota. And I was like, I'm gonna go check it out. Like, A, it'll give me an excuse to get out of this situation I'm in, because like he's not gonna be the type of person who says like, oh, I don't want you to like get better. So like it was an easy out. And I did not want to do treatment again. I'd only done treatment one other time when I was a kid, and it was not really the first time I had fun, but like the second time I thought that sounded miserable. And so I went to treatment, and on the way up there, I remember saying like a foxhole prayer that was like, God, if like You show me a reason why I'm supposed to be here. I will give this like an honest effort. And when I got out of the car at the treatment center, one of my friends who I've known in the WACYPAA world for a really long time was there because he worked at the treatment center. And I didn't know he worked at this treatment center. I thought he was just like a gay DJ in the WACYPAA world, but it turns out he had a real human job as well. And he was like, I know you. And I was like, I know you too. And then I was like, well, shit. This is my sign to do everything the way I'm supposed to. So I wanted to do like just a brief, so everyone knows I want to do a brief like summation of what got me to like 29, because we do have a new person here. So I'm going to talk about what my steps looked like this time getting sober, because I feel like that's really relevant. That like it doesn't matter what the work I did before was, because that was the work I did before and it didn't work. This is what I'm currently doing and what I currently like what I did to get to where I'm at now. So I moved into a sober house after treatment and I got a sponsor. And my sponsor I got during treatment, he was introduced to me. And I remember the first time I called him, I was like, yeah, like I'm gonna pretend like I don't really know anything so I can get the most I can out of this experience. And he was like, bitch, you don't know anything. You're in treatment. And that was like the first time someone had spoken louder than my alcoholism in a really long time. So I was like, yeah, you're right. Like I don't know anything. Like I'm here. Because like if I knew something, I wouldn't be here. It's as simple as that. So I started working with him and I got really intensive in the work. And I will say like my disdain for my higher power still existed. But while I was in treatment, there was this guy. He was like he worked there and he was the only attractive one who worked there, which is why I think he spoke louder than my alcoholism there. But he said, I was talking to him about how I didn't have a relationship with my God anymore because my God let me down. And he was like, well, why don't you just have like a new conception of God or something like that? And I was like, ugh, that's like really, really insightful. You are a genius. You're a genius with your 6'7" figure and your beautiful teeth. Of course, I can have a new conception of God. And that's what really started my journey into believing that, like, if I have a new experience with the steps, then maybe I can have a new experience with a higher power. So that's what I did. I did step work like I had never done step work before. And what does that mean? That means I showed up in a way where I didn't act like I knew how to do step work. Like all that time beforehand, I was like redoing the steps, but I was acting like I knew everything already. So what was I going to get out of it? This time I showed up with like an open mind that like maybe I was going to have a new experience. And maybe like when my sponsor was going to tell me how he took me through the book and what he did, I wouldn't initially go, well, that's wrong. That's not how I've done it before. Well, that can't possibly work because that's not how I've done it because all the ways I did it before didn't work. So I went through the steps with him, really grueling process in the sense that it was just a lot of like me getting out of my own way. So he would tell me how to do things. And like I remember we were doing like a 4 step and I was like, he was telling me how to do like a sex inventory. And the whole time I was like, that's not right in my head. But like I needed to get out of my own way, so I just didn't say anything. And what I ended up doing was I did probably the most thorough inventory I'd done in a really long time, and it was really insightful because that inventory taught me that like, my biggest fear was men, or my biggest resentment was men, and then my biggest fear was also men. So when we got to my sex inventory part of it, how did my resentment and my fear lead to how I manipulated men for the last 10 years of my life? So it made perfect sense to me. And I was able to then like finally do like a fourth column, especially in my sex inventory, where it was like when I got to 6 and 7, I was able to be like, God, have all of me, good and bad. I don't know what I'm supposed to keep and I don't know what I'm supposed to give away, so just have all of me. And that is what I do still for my 6 and 7. I wake up every day and I say, God, have all of me, good and bad, and whatever you choose to remove, remove. Um, the trick to that is God has removed some things from me that I didn't know I wanted to remove. And the action part of that, besides just asking for it to be removed, is then the bargaining part where if I have to make a decision if I want to bargain to keep it or not. And that is not always the easiest. Like why, like I have to trust that there's a reason why this was removed, and then I have to be like, well, it's removed for a reason that I don't need to know. And like I'm one of those people that like I need to believe in the mysticism of spirituality and AA for this to work for me. I need to not know all the answers because I can think myself right out of the rooms real quick. I'm a psychologist by trade. That does not help. So I need to not know the hoopla behind all of it. I just need to be like oohed and awed by the mysticism because my life is proof that it works, and that's all I need. My amends process, I made like some big financial amends. I made amends to ex-boyfriends. I made amends to former friends. I started showing up differently. My 10th step, I just spoke on this tonight. My 10th step is like I continue to take personal inventory. What that means for me is I continue to be aware of like what I'm doing throughout the day. So like a good example was today. I like my boyfriend texted me and he was like, "We need cat food and cat litter." And like I'm so busy. Um, like I in my head, I'm the world's busiest human being who's ever existed. So I was like, "Oh, can you like get it for me?" And he went, "No," with no explanation. He just said no. Like, what? Why are you just telling me no without like why are you giving me a good reason to not do everything that I demand? And I had two options. I got really mad at first, and then because I continued to take personal inventory, like a split second later, I went, well, maybe he's like really busy. And instead of, you know, jumping down his throat about how he can't do this for me when I'm the busiest person in the world, why don't I just go to Target after work and ask him, is there anything he needs from Target? Because like this is his only day off, so maybe he really can't do anything. Like maybe he can't go and get this for me because he's doing his like own thing. And that's what like when I was talking about that tonight, like that's what continuing to take personal inventory means to me is that I'm constantly and admitting I'm wrong isn't admitting I'm always wrong to other people. It's admitting I'm wrong to myself. And what that looks like is like my first thought was wrong. My first thought is like I'm wrong and the way you're about to react is wrong. So like why don't you behave better? Like why don't you just be better? And like not do the things that you like are constantly trying not to do. Meditation for me really looks like I do a lot of running is a good meditation for me. I'm not like a very good like sit down and like float off the floor and like be lifted by like the spirituality of the air. Like I'm not a sit still person, but I do a lot of things that keep my mind from thinking about me. Because when my mind stops thinking about me, that's when I can start to think about others. So I like to do activities that facilitate that. So like working out is a big one because then I start to think like halfway through my run, like how can I be useful to like the people I'm going to interact with today? Legos are a big one because if I think about anything outside of Legos when I'm doing a Lego, I want to throw the Lego at the wall because they're the most frustrating thing to ever build. And I don't know why I continue to put myself through this torture, but like we'll figure it out. More will be revealed. Um, and then the biggest one for me in my life is the 12th step of continuing to carry this message to other alcoholics, practice these principles in all my affairs. And what does that look like? I am someone who's of service as much as I possibly can. And I like to do it from varying degrees, whether that is working on the committees that I'm working on. I'm currently the outreach chair for WACYPAA, which is the Heartland Area Conference of Young People in AA. I am the outreach chair for ICYPAA, which is the International Conference of Young People in AA. What that has looked like in my life is I've been gone every weekend since August 1st, going to every single conference that all these other states are holding. I have not had a weekend off since, but I get to one of my favorite things about outreaching these conferences is I'm not just telling people to like pre-reg for a conference and come have so much fun in Minnesota. I get to sit at a table and I think I have this like innate gift where like people who are uncomfortable for some reason think I'm like warm and approachable, which is wild to me because I'm like thorny and prickly on the inside. But I love talking to the newcomer who feels uncomfortable in their skin in a big, scary environment and like letting them know that like, hey, like you're home. Like if you like feel uncomfortable and you like want to sit and talk to me for like the next 20 minutes about literally nothing because it makes you feel like you have a place inside the rooms, like do that. Like I'm cool with that because I never want to be so big that I'm not speaking to the newcomer anymore. And like I was just talking to my boyfriend about this, like I was doing chairs at the meeting that we were just at, not my home group. It's like a newcomer job is what like they basically always write it off to be. I'm never too big to do chairs at a meeting because I think like that's when we have the chance to like potentially connect with the newcomer and like be able to have a conversation outside of like what we normally would talk about. Wow, that was a really quick 20 minutes. Holy shit, that snuck up on me. Well, I want to say thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to speak. To sum it all up, try to always have a new experience with the steps. If you're coming back from a slip, maybe try having a new experience with AA because maybe your first thought is wrong about how we did it before. Never be too big for service to Alcoholics Anonymous, because we need to make sure that these shares exist in our future, in the future for others. And you know, keep on trudging that road to happy destiny. All right, with that, I will pass.